Good morning, everyone. It is 9:01. I'd like to call this meeting of the Community and Economic Development Committee to order. My name is Assemblymember George Martinez. I'll pass it over to my co-chair for introduction.
Kevin Cross.
Are there any Assembly members on the phone with us this morning?
Karen Bronga is on the phone. I'm almost in, though.
Thank you, Karen. I don't hear any other Assembly members. As they come on, we'll introduce them as they come into the meeting today. We have a light agenda. We will have a discussion today for a review and update on our 2024 legislative priorities as our second thing that we do today. But first, let's have a conversation on state hemp regulations, enforcement, and I believe we're joined by code enforcement for that. Yeah. And as folks introduce or speak, please introduce yourselves for the record.
I'm Rick Fern, I'm the lead land use enforcement officer.
If you would, since our microphone's way over here and that's recording us, just if you could come up closer and then speak clearly.
Thank you.
From the diaphragm.
I'm pretty loud.
There you go. It's your megaphone.
I'm Rick Fern, I'm the lead land use enforcement officer with Municipality of Anchorage. Our section is the section that enforces municipal marijuana regulations. We were somewhat expecting to hear from the state. We really don't have anything to present ourselves. We're interested in what they have to provide to us.
Hold on, sir. If you're on the phone, can you hit mute on your phone? Somebody's line is noisy. Thank you. Great. If you wouldn't mind, Rich, could you just introduce your team and
Sure.
what you all do so we have it on the record?
Sure, we have John Snelson, who's the code enforcement, chief of code enforcement. We have Elaine Keebler-Reed. We kind of call her the marijuana queen just by fate geographically. She has the majority of the marijuana facilities. We have Tim Quinones. He's field officer. We have Michelle Goldstein and Mike Radovich. Mike Radovich, who all are field inspectors.
And we're joined in person by Member Bronga. Thank you, Karen. Just a follow-up question, if you would. Where are you housed in the municipality?
Upstairs.
In the permit?
In this building, yes. We are actually part of development services.
And your staffing numbers? You're fully staffed?
Yes, we are. We are. Our sister organization Right Away is not. Land use enforcement has 5 field officers plus me, and we are fully staffed.
Mandy, our staff person, is the state regulation specialist for us and is not with us today. So we're joined by another staff person who's filling in.
Well, I just have a couple questions.
Yes.
So you said you have 5 field officers?
Yes.
Excellent. Give me an idea of what, like how many inspections are done in a typical week for a field officer, and what that process looks like as far as code enforcement.
As far as marijuana specifically, or just regular enforcement in general?
Well, that's an interesting question, because do they just strictly do marijuana, or what other
No.
enforcements do they work on?
No, our main areas of enforcement are Title 21,
Okay.
which is zoning code, and we took over a number of sections of Title 15 from the health department a number of years ago. So garbage has turned into a big portion of what we do.
So unsightly properties, people who accumulate a lot of,
Well, garbage, and there's garbage and junk. There's 2 different animals there. We do both. Basically, anything wrong with private property will come through us.
okay. So that's interesting, because since, just to make valuable use of your time and ask some questions I've always had in my mind, what is the distinguishing factor between junk and perhaps someone's personal property that they're...
There's a very specific definition of junk. It has to meet certain definitions, and it basically, in a nutshell, you can break it down if if it's something that cannot be used for its intended its initial purpose. So
Okay.
you got a car, a junk car, you have to have certain elements, but there's a certain specific definitions that we use, so it's thankfully it's not very subjective. You know, we have it, if it meets the definition, it's junk, if it doesn't, it's not junk, it's stuff.
Okay.
And we also do the final zoning inspections for building safety, landscaping, parking, that realm of stuff. So our day could be, in general, pretty varied. Yeah. So we could have, you could have any, yeah, we do the business licensing. Their child care licensing. We do an awful lot, I guess. And they're all, yeah.
So I guess my last question, at least one for now. The Assembly in the last 2 years has made quite a few significant changes as far as land use, Title 21, different things. How are you guys acclimating to, adjusting to the significant changes that we put in place?
Well, what you folks pass is what we enforce, so, we all have certain opinions on certain things, but whatever you guys pass is what we do, so for us, it's not subjective, it's very black and white. And that's the equitable way to do it is, if it's in code, that's what we enforce, and if it's not, it's not. So,
But the learning curve hasn't been overwhelming?
no,
All right, excellent.
it has not.
One of the concerns we have is that when we turn some areas and turn things upside down, just readjusting to a new way and readjusting to new information and making sure that, things aren't being overlooked or mistakes aren't being made in our eagerness to resolve some of our housing issues, not unintentionally creating more problems.
If we notice that at our level, we bring it up to the planning department. We look at Title 21 as really their code. It's their house, we basically work for their house, but we, part of development services. So if we have issues with the way the code is written, we basically take it with the planning department.
All right, excellent.
Member Braun?
I'm sorry, I could not hear who you were.
Oh, I'm Rich Fern.
Rich Byrne. So, Karen Braun, I was just wanting to clarify, so that the junk, that sounds pretty definitive, like a property. So I called on a few that they're hoarder situations. Every neighborhood has a few of those. And it seems like the constituents that I have reaching out to me have made multiple 311, multiple reports on properties. And is the fact that, so I'm thinking of one that's just recent, I've had 3 or 4 calls on it. Is it just that what they're seeing is actually usable, and so that's where
That could very well be the case. We have a specific definition of what a junk item is. If it doesn't meet the definition of junk, you can't enforce on that.
So even if it's spilling out through the driveway in the front yard and?
That's where we kind of transition from Title 21 as far as being a junk area to a public nuisance and unsightly premises, but that is pretty subjective.
Yeah.
So we have to really make sure we have our ducks in a row if we're gonna it's stuff, if it's scattered about the property, there is kind of if it's stuff or if it is actually a public nuisance.
Okay, and then if I keep going, so I've heard that if there's no heat and water in the premises and it's a derelict property, eventually, what's the process of those? Because I know we have at least one in our neighborhood.
That section of Title 15, which is a housing code, that's what we took over from the health department a number of years ago. Our group works hand in hand with code abatement. Our guys can go out and say, okay, the heat's not 68 degrees, 18 inches above the floor, or the pipe's leaking or something like that. And we can try to do that section of the housing code. If there's something more technical, we'll bring in the code abatement guys. But we will generally do the initial response of no water, no heat, and all that. We'll go verify it, and then in the case of no water, no heat, we'll bring code abatement in because Title 23 deals with the dangerous structures. So if you don't have water, you can't live there. So that's as far as the squatters and the drug houses and places like that. That's usually our ace in the hole, is they don't have water. So you can't live there. So we can call it a dangerous structure. Code abatement can have them removed by APD and we can board it up. So that's what happens with the drug houses.
So the house I'm thinking of is not inhabited by drug users, but it is just literally no inhabitants.
Mhm.
The owner uses Chugach Foothills Park as the outhouse as his restroom, occasionally comes in and out. And that's been, the neighbors have had eyes on that property, that I think you probably know which one it is, for years and lots of reports. So just, kind of frustrated if, what the process forward on something like that. Because that neighborhood, my neighborhood's beautiful. But more importantly, there's a family that could be occupying that place. And
If it's on the vacant and abandoned registry? or-
I have no idea. It's got tarps over it, so there's definitely no vents from the ceiling and sandbags all over the roof. I went and turned the water on and no water came out of the faucet. He's a hoarder.
Is it the open with the, doesn't drive as the?
No, I'll talk to you later about it.
Okay, all right.
But just the process of some of those are really rough on neighbors.
Mhm.
The other thing is, I used to hear that if the vehicles had no current tags, that was a trigger, because there's several in our area that have 8 vehicles, lined up in the yard.
The registration is it's still included in the definition of a junk vehicle, but that was adjudicated in Supreme Court level a number of years ago. It was literally a case of a Cadillac or a Mercedes and a BMW that were just a couple years old. They didn't have tags. And at the time, the code enforcement section tried to call them junk and took it to court. Of course, we got beat very badly. So what we do now is it's still part of the definition of a junk vehicle. We can use it as an element as long as we have 2 other elements. Missing body parts, broken glass, something like that. So we can still use it to stack them up, saying, okay, it's a junk vehicle. It has A, B, C, and then we can use it as D. To call it junk vehicle. But the lack of registration alone does not make it a junk
Okay.
vehicle.
You got to follow?
Thank you for that.
Can I just interrupt one real quick?
Sure.
You had said something about.
Excuse me, for the record, can you just speak louder and say your name?
Absolutely. So you had said that properties, you want my name as well?
Yes,
Michelle
for the record.
Goldstein with Code Enforcement.
Thank you.
You had said that your constituents are reporting these at 311?
Yeah, they've done the ArcGIS marking of junked properties, but they've also called in because of concerns of maybe drug activity.
Okay, so those are going to APD, because 311 that
Wouldn't be
calls
going to
don't go to us.
But
I
if they
just
do the
wanted to clarify.
ArcGIS, you would see it.
That name portal, yes.
Yeah, that portal.
Yes, yes, I just wanted to clarify,
I'm
just
glad
in
you
case
did.
you were
Well-
directing people to go to 311 for all of this, I was like, well,
Don't do that.
we wouldn't be getting those
Okay.
in our office.
And so the ArcGIS is the best place to get in there and report
The dynamic
something?
portal, yes, absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, thanks for that.
For clarification, are you talking about Anchorage Works portal?
Yes.
Maybe
That's
I-
the simplest name for it.
Yeah.
I called it that. That's my fault.
Yeah. ArcGIS is the mapping
Mapping,
platform.
right.
Okay.
Anchorage Works
Okay, cool.
is the easiest way.
Someone wanted to comment? Okay, cool. Just to follow up on that. So, do you all get subsequent reports from 311 APD if they're triggering into your lane?
We work quite closely with the CAP team. So if there's a problem property that the patrol gets, and they're repeatedly going back to it, they bring it up to CAP, and then CAP will communicate with us saying, hey, we're getting a lot of calls to this place. can you guys take a look at it? Or patrol says there's no water. So we have a very close, very functioning working relationship with the CAT team these days, which is very nice because we haven't always had that rapport with the police department. So with the CAT team, I'd say the last 6 years or so, we've had a great relationship and very effective in taking care of problem properties once we know of them.
Right.
Can I ask-
Thank you. Yes, Bob? Yeah.
Is Mr. Snelson here?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, so could you share how many properties you said that, I think you said 6 properties that look vacant and abandoned have been taken over? I thought I heard that from you.
Yeah, John Snelson there, Chief of Code Enforcement. So that's actually a code abatement issue, but they have 6 properties that they're attempting to clean up right now. 2 are under contract, and they're working on the contract for the other 4.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing.
Just for the record to note, Member Volan joined us at 9:10 on the phone. Thank you. Member Cross?
Yeah, so thank you so much. This is really helpful to kind of, although this wasn't officially on our agenda so much, but it's great to have this conversation because I had often had inquiries about that. So, it's always interesting to me how we walk those lines because one, we want to protect people's private property rights. So it shouldn't be illegal for me to have a vacant house as long as it's not becoming a health hazard, right? I mean, if I want to own property, I should be able. So vacant and abandoned at some point, that means that it's becoming a health hazard. Maybe it's attracting unsightly individuals or whatever that is. It's becoming a blight to the community versus my right and my private property rights just to own a house and have a vacant house. Even if it made me look abandoned, it's not. I own it. If there's a maintenance issue, I take care of it. And so in respecting people's private property rights, and that would even go into personal property, because recreationally I build furniture. If you ask me, every piece of wood in my garage has potential value. Now I don't scatter them around my yard, but I have separation anxiety letting go even of small pieces that have potential projects. So, but some people have trouble keeping that within the capacity of their home and it spills out to the outside. So when it comes to those construction debris and stuff like that, it's interesting to see at what point private property becomes unsightly to where, but yet does my right to be secure in my possessions on the land I pay for, where does that infringe on just your visual pleasure, right? So I always wondered how that is defined in there. Understanding individuals have private property rights, they have the right to own stuff even if you don't like to look at it.
As a group, I would say we're a pretty pragmatic group and pretty reasonable. None of us in our work group are inexperienced. We're definitely, it's a journeyman level work group. So the people we have, most of them have backgrounds in either law enforcement or some type of enforcement somewhere else. So when we get them, we are able to train them for our point of view, and we do take personal property rights very seriously. And we take, like I said, we have the definition, and if you have a piece of wood that can still be used as a piece of wood, it's not junk. If it's been sitting there for 5 years and it's starting to rot, maybe meets the definition, unsightly or something like that. But like I said, we're a very pragmatic group, and we very much respect private property and due process as far as something that we would take to the administrative hearing officer.
Well, I appreciate that. And I've never heard any complaints regarding your enforcement. Just curious on how you guys make those mental deliberations. And the other thing is, I spoke with Scott Campbell about this probably about 4 months ago. And it was a suggestion we had as far as reporting because, what I would love to see, but this is an IT issue, right? This is just as far as the municipality conveying information in a more streamlined way for the benefit of the public, which would be on the open permit site where you can go in and check and see if they're expired open permits or whatever. It would be great that if you just had a history, if there was any other fines that were levied against the property by the municipality, because that's the go-to for most of the real estate industry. They go to the open permits to see if any work's been done that has been closed out, so they know if something needs to get inspected. It would be really nice if they knew that, hey, listen, also, there's an infraction on here because he didn't pull a hot water heater permit, and there's a fine out there that's been adding whatever, $500 a day or whatever. There's a $200,000 potential lien. You don't have to have the amount, but the infractions, maybe it's showed up on a vacant abandoned property list. But any other issues that are outside just permitting should probably be on that page. It'd be really interesting, whoever does the formatting, does the programming, you would just create additional fields like you have fields for permits. There would just be additional fields for any other infractions that apply against the property, whether it's, that way an individual who's purchasing a property knows not only if there is, before they go in and spending the expense on a title report and doing a really thorough search, they know before they bring an offer or when they're in deliberations on that property, whether or not it's not only got open permits, but if there's any other infractions against it. That would be really nice to consolidate those on one. I don't know who runs that magic over there and pulls the IT strings.
IT would be, that would be a challenge, and I know it's being looked at as far as changing the program that's used. Infor is our program right now, and it's being looked at to replace it with something that incorporates, because planning uses City View mostly. We in development service use Infor. They don't talk to each other very well. The best thing right now in that situation though is call 4011, which is we man the code enforcement hotline. It's another thing that our folks do, and we can tell you if there's any open complaints on the property or if there have been any open complaints. And what we can check, it will be us, land use, abatement shows up in there, solid waste services. So we can tell you if fire's in there, and fire doesn't look that much anymore, but we can tell you if there's any issues currently with the property and what issues have been present in the past. We can do that.
All right,
Just verbally. Or email. Email works great too.
Maybe rather than put that information on there, on the page where people do permit searches, in big bold, it says, for information regarding additional infractions, call 411.
Yes.
Because I don't think the public otherwise would.
No.
Just to clarify, this is Mike Radovan, code enforcement officer. Did you say 41? It's 4141.
Oh, 411.
I'm sorry.
343-4141.
I'm glad for that clarification.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I felt totally out of the loop. Yeah, 411?
Yeah, so did I.
I thought it was a Mary J. Blige.
I thought it was a magical moment for me too.
Okay, right on. All right, and that was, say that number again, sir?
343-4141.
Right on, 4141.
There we go.
Excellent, thank you. This raises a couple questions that I'd love to follow up on. First, on the data. One of the questions that I asked about with respect to permitting and things that are coming out of this building is that relationship between the public's knowledge of the workload, which I think is often misunderstood, the amount of work, the types of work, and how do you all publish, or what reports do you all publish to the public with any frequency that says this is the workload in these particular categories, if at all?
We don't publish anything that goes to the public. Chief Snelson publishes our internal stuff. I'm not sure where that goes. John probably better.
Yeah, John Snelson right here. So there's nothing that we provide to the public on our end. However, once a quarter, we fill out reports and we send those up to the administration, and then the administration will put that information out.
What is included in your quarterly report? What type of information is it?
Zoning inspections, how many zoning inspections we perform, if we meet the 1 day or same day timeline as far as providing that inspection from the date that it was requested. Code enforcement complaints, how soon we actually investigate those complaints. And then on the other end, right of way has basically the same milestones as well. How many open service requests do we have? How many open code enforcement cases do we have? How many we've actually closed out?
Thank you, John. Do you know what, just following up on that, do you know what, what's done with that information, how it is presented to the assembly or to the public?
I do not. Okay. On my end, I send it up to the director level. The director provides it to the administration,
Right.
and then I don't know where it goes from there.
Great. Because one of the items for us is the idea of the dashboard. And so, with the health department, for example, we have reporting at a dashboard level that has all of these indicators and boxes that basically say this is the work that they've done, the amount of TD cases, the amount of outstanding X, Y, all these variables. And I think that's an important element for transparency at all the operations out of this building, as best as we can, figuring out what is the right mix of a dashboard that tells the public, this is the work that happens, this is the amount of work that happens, because valuing the work comes from understanding the amount of work and that people have. So that's an important aspect that we're focused on here as well.
Just to follow up to
Yeah.
some of the questions you asked, I think just some, maybe take a step back and how we work and how we get out of the door. You know, we get the inspection requests from the health department, animal control, clerk's office, and those are generally done, we try to get them done within 7 business days of once they are assigned an officer. Our normal workflow is we get a complaint, it either comes through the 41141 or the dynamic portal, and unless it's a life safety issue or garbage, which is those 2 issues we try to put eyes on the following day, the following business day. Our normal procedure is we'll send out what we call a friendly letter. It's basically just a letter to the property owner saying, hey, we got a complaint about this issue on your property. We don't know if it's true or not, but we're gonna come up about 10 days to have a look. If you'd like, please give us a call. That letter is very, very effective. That was brought back from Phoenix, Arizona by Craig Campbell back in the day. And when they brought that idea up, all of us, field people at times like, what a bunch of baloney, it's just, fluff. Well, we were absolutely wrong because the letter is very, very effective. I think I estimate probably 70% of our complaints are resolved with that letter alone. So once our folks go out, in the 10 days, they look at it and say, oh, it's cleaned up or it's gone, and a lot of times the property owner has called and said, oh yeah, I can get rid of that card or whatever, it's solved. But then once we go out and put eyes on it, then we say, okay, there is a violation, then they get a formal notice of violation in the mail. So then that's when the formal enforcement process starts. So that's I wanted to go back and tell you how we actually got out of the door this morning. So that's how we work.
And I appreciate that. If I can, I'm going to dig into at least this relationship to the overall subject that we had on our agenda today. What type of things do you see with code enforcement of hemp or marijuana? What are the types of things that you're seeing? What are the types of infractions that we're...
The infraction, we've got that down pretty good. The most common infraction is odor. And we've got a process that we agreed to with the assembly at the time and the marijuana industry is basically we have 2 officers. For us to write a citation, we're gonna have 2 officers on site. We're gonna have basically a 30-minute window that they stay on site and they're gonna be getting odor of marijuana from that facility for that 30-minute window. It could be intermittent, but it's gonna be consistent within that 30-minute window. And we document all the environmental aspects of the wind, temperatures, everything like that. And then we make contact with the manager on duty. So that was what we agreed to, and it's very effective, and we don't lose when we do rate take for that, when we do that.
About how many things do we write for those things?
Right, for the odor. Most of the marijuana code as written now, we've got fun to find. It's fairly clear. There's one thing that I think would be beneficial. When I reviewed the code last time, it has to do with the hemp that came up because we were dealing with the definition of marijuana. And what would make it easier if there was something in our code that simply said, we follow our code, but we also follow anything the state comes up with THC products. Instead of the definition of marijuana, because the definition of marijuana that's in the state statute right now specifically includes hemp products. So if we had something, just a one-liner saying, we can also enforce everything as far as the state regulations for THC products, that will be neat. That's nice and clear. So once they pass it, and if it's something that's going to take a number of months or whatever before the city actually gets something codified, it still lets us enforce that code.
I understand what you're saying. Let me just I heard that there's an opportunity in municipal code to create a line essentially that gives a permission to enforcement to adopt or to adjust to any state changes prior to any legislative action from this body.
Yes, one line, maybe it's that simple.
I would encourage you to send an email to me
Okay.
with the language that you want in that one line, and any background information that you see fit, send that to us. That sounds like something we can look at,
Sure.
for sure. Just following on that question of the enforcement question, do you all also, what other sorts of infractions do you see? And are you also the ones that can report back on the quality of a business, for example, dispelling myths or beliefs? Example would be general public, Joe Public or Jane Public says marijuana businesses attract an unsightly negative attention in our community, there's loitering and whatnot. And operationally, I've never seen that. But do you all have indicators of the amount of complaints you get for those types of?
We don't, that's, the loitering has there never been an issue as far as I'm aware, and I see every complaint that comes through us, goes through my desk. So the one time we did have that problem was initially when we had Canabasca was having some disposal issues with their dumpster. I don't know if you remember when that was happening. That was just whoever, kids, homeless, whatever, was trying to force their way into their dumpster because they were sloppy with their disposal stuff. That's the closest that I recall of anything coming in about loitering. I don't recall loitering ever being a problem. Businesses, they pretty much police themselves.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, do you all see or are you all part of the enforcement of the illegal sale of products to minors? And
It's in Title 21, but that would actually be an APD issue, not for us.
So APD would be the folks who, if there was a report of a business selling products or products turning up in the hands of minors,
That would be
APD would do the investigation on that? Okay, thank you. Karen, did you have a follow-up?
Well, I'm not going to be able to make an intelligible question, I realize, but maybe you could help me. I just went to tour a marijuana cultivator, producer shop, and he said one of his biggest challenges, he's like by the arrow doing everything right, and he said there's ma and pa stores that are able to undercut and they're not being enforced. And I didn't really understand if that was the hemp product or if he just felt like he's going completely by the book, and it sounded to me like he felt there were operations that were kind of flying under the radar. And I just wondered, do you do like at a restaurant, health department comes in and checks occasionally are you doing that with the different shops? I just don't
Yes,
understand.
they do, while we're doing the biannual inspections now, but we have a quite extensive checklist that we go through and we inspect the different places. And they're all held to the same account. AMCO also does the inspections. We generally will do a first inspection, we'll do jointly with the AMCO officers for the initial licensing inspection. Everybody gets treated the same.
So 2 a year?
No, they get one that's biannual inspection, that we actually do a physical inspection of the premises.
Okay.
And everybody's treated the same, it's the same checklist, it covers, basically, the checklist was made from the regulations, from municipal code. We went through line by line and they pulled out the stuff that was really relevant. We looked at when we get an initial package from the planning department, thank you folks that approved, we inspect the site plan, we inspect the floor plan, everything. The one thing that, when we first started going a couple years ago, the waste disposal was kind of an issue, but that's all been pretty much hashed out. That's really not an issue anymore. Like I said, the only thing that comes in on a regular basis and is not frequent is odor. You have some odor escape, and early on, when we came up with that criteria for our citation, there was we were having a problem with Danish gardens in South Anchorage. For a constant Miller thing, he just had a very, very porous building over there. Great Northern Cannabis has a place right across the street from them, very close to them, and we were sitting, Elaine and I were there, and it was like, I'm smelling weed from the corner. Are we smelling weed from it? Because at the time, they were kind of the gold standard, they were doing everything right. Well, what we ended up finding out was it was lunch hour. So they had these 2 doors, you have the dead space in between, but they had 10, 15 people leaving at one time. So the doors were constantly open. So hence, that's where we come up with that 30-minute window, because you're always gonna get some escape, especially from the cultivation facilities. You know, it could be some guy just taking out trash. You know, so you're gonna get a blast, but you're not gonna get that sustained odor. So that's, like I said, that's when we went back to that 30-minute window and 2 people, because you know, what is the normal sense of smell? Well, we try to get 2 people to call the noise. So, but,
Are you done with the question?
Well, I'm thinking that, I should have wrote all this down, but I thought he may have been talking about people are starting to fly marijuana up, and that would be illegal,
that'd
correct?
be
So those are police.
That'd be a law enforcement function. Right?
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks for clarifying that.
Cool. Mr. Cross?
Yeah, just 2 things before we move on, because well, we're actually doing pretty good on time. One is, so does code abatement, do you guys have any education requirements? I mean, I was a journeyman pipe fitter, and even though they don't have, the contractor I worked for required additional education every year. I know the American standard for home inspectors, they require 20 hours, most of it. But as far as code abatement, do you guys have continuing education, like a goal, or maybe it's not a requirement, but it's, what's the word, or an incentive for it?
We're not code abatement.
Oh, excuse me. I mean,
We're totally different than them. I know they do have continuing education.
what your enforcement?
Right, and there's ICC, continuing education, and actually there's a zoning enforcement certification for ICC, and some of us do have that, and we do have to have continuing education with the code abatement stuff. Most of those guys are certified building inspectors. I think that's their, they start out as structural, but then they get that certified building inspector, but they have to do the continuing education.
So do your departments have any continuing education requirements?
No.
Okay.
Well,
Johnson Nelson here. We generally do, yes. So there are certain classes that as they come up, we have certifications, and we make sure that we have the renewal, both in right-of-way and land use enforcement started doing it as well, as far as the last one that they did was traffic control.
Okay.
So there is continuing education. The whole objective is we bring in qualified individuals, and then we actually keep their qualifications up to date as basically new information comes on board. We want to make sure that we're actually fully staffed, and we want to make sure that we're fully capable of doing the job that we're asked to do for the public. So,
Excellent. Appreciate it. And just a point of information real quick. Yesterday there was an AMATS Technical Advisory Committee meeting, and Transportation Department, or AMATS, did come out with their new safety program, their new, it's a pedestrian safety plan. I would encourage all of you to look at that. In fact, George, particularly you, it looks like your district, Mulvey Road, is probably one of the most dangerous streets in Anchorage, with the most amount of vehicle, bicycle, and pedestrian. So some really good information on that for those individuals who are interested in what that looks like and identifying those key intersections, those key areas that have lots of pedestrian issues. So that report just came out yesterday. And then the last thing I just want to ask is, is there an opportunity for an individual like me just to do a ride-along with as you go out and do inspections? I mean, I'm just curious on
absolutely, yes.
what that looks like. I think that would be, I've done a couple with the police, and I've done some with fire and stuff like that, but I mean, I think what you do as far as, how our laws and our ordinances and our codes, both positive and negatively impact, the public, and what that relationship looks like would be very, very helpful. I'd love to ride along with you guys. So, I don't know how to get on a list somewhere if I got to fill out a form, but
I think you have 3 in-person assembly members who are interested.
You can make someone real nervous, we all show up in a short school.
With our jacket.
Well, we used to do, we used to do this more often with, we have, you know, direct ride-alongs
Yeah.
and mayoral ride-alongs, so it's not something we haven't done in the past.
Member Brown?
I wondered, I think my question was answered when I called in, but other people might want to know the intersection between you guys and a mobile home park. And we get a lot of calls about problems there that you don't have enforcement, or you don't have.
Well, we do. I think
Okay.
we do have enforcement in mobile home parks. A little bit of history, we used to have an inspection program for mobile home parks, and it was actually very effective, but the mobile home park industry didn't like it. Because our code specific, Title 21 is very specific that mobile home park owner is responsible for every code in there, not just zoning code, but building code and everything else that goes on within that park. So that covered all wild additions and construction and stuff that was going on. So the park owner was forced to police their own tenants, which kept us out of going out and saying, okay, this, you know, we're not property managers for the mobile home park owners. Mobile home parks can be difficult, but that particular code section makes it easier for us. If we don't know about it, we can't enforce it. We know Riviera Terrace in the spring. We're discussing basically doing a ride through, like something along the lines of what we did with Clean Sweep in the past, just because we are getting complaints, and there right now everything's covered up. You can't see anything. You've got 5 feet of snow on it, and I think that place actually has some infrastructure problem. I think the street got ripped out by the stream, and I think that was probably required on their site plan. But mobile homes parks can be challenging. The program in its day was effective, but they're not to the point that we really need to go back to that. With individual complaints, we were able to take care of that. And most of the larger mobile home parks in town anymore are owned by a fairly large corporation out of Michigan. I think Southfield is where they're from. And they're pretty responsive. And we have communication open with their district manager. So we're able to take care of mobile home parks.
So when someone from the park contacts you, you talk to the management?
Yes.
And if they haven't responded, then could the person recontact you that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That sounds
But
good.
like I said, we're not property managers.
Right.
So they are responsible for their own property.
There was another park that just got purchased off of Muldoon Road
Yes.
that we got a message that they were gonna have trash cans.
Yes.
And that's really bear country, so do you deal with that at all? or-
Absolutely.
Okay,
So, and we've been out there and spoken to them about it. And they are providing the very resistant
Oh,
cans.
good.
So they're not just cans out there. And I think that's actually gonna be a better situation than they have right now, because right now they've just got this big dumpster, that require closure, and half the time that stays open. So I think what they're doing is gonna be more effective for the bears. They are using the bear resistant cans. We talked to them. They're working diligently to get their tenants on board. And as we talked to them about even the placement of the cans, getting the can back away from the street, and that sort of stuff. So they were very receptive to talk with us about it.
thank you.
Just to follow up on that, and then I have one question on Delta 9, and then we can close off this conversation. The other subsequent question that was associated with that particular trailer park and the trash question was, are the individual trailer or residents responsible for fines that may happen with any particular
Between
trash.
them and their management.
Right.
We don't, so we are not property management, we're not gonna go and talk to 20 tenants on the garbage day, that's up to the ownership, and that's what Title 21 is very specific, that the ownership is responsible for all codes being obeyed within their property.
Clear, thank you.
And then even, another thing, this is kind of off base, not, it's trailer park related, but, the water systems in the mobile home parks. A lot of people in the last couple of years made the false assumption that the municipality was responsible for the water systems within the parks. It's actually not us, it's the state. That used to be an inspection item on our check sheet that the park, if they were not on public systems, that they had to have an annual inspection from TEC to operate. You know, that kind of got lost in the shuffle a couple of years ago. But the one thing I never really understood is how the municipality got, roped into that.
Well, and so, yeah, the DEC, well, there's other areas, and forgive me for interrupting, but there's other areas which is, I've always been surprised there's not a permit requirement for, unless it's over 5,000 square feet of fill being removed, is buried heating fuel tanks, which is the removal of those, because some of those are really close to foundations and they're pretty big holes that they're digging, and so, and then it's the removal of that. The DEC does require some soil sampling, make sure that tank hasn't leaked and stuff, but the municipality of Anchorage doesn't have any permit requirement or doesn't have anything as far as an enforcement agency for those, other than, a DEC, but I've seen some of those be collapsed sinkholes, sinking properties, like that. There's I can't remember the count that we received, but you guys probably know this better than I do, but there's somewhere still in the hundreds of them buried around Anchorage. It seems like a couple times a year we find them, particularly on properties built before 1964, which is when it started all their infrastructure. So typically what we do in the real estate industry, what we encourage people to do is, if the property was built before 1964, before Instar came in, there's a couple companies, environmental companies, that come out and they'll do like a deep scan metal detector, and then track and look at the maps, almost like a phase 1 environmental, because they can see if it was above ground, and identify the area of where the tank may have been, and then search. And that way you get a certification, because last thing you want to do is find out you have a buried heating fuel tank that's been leaking on your property. Then it's a nightmare with DEC, nightmare.
Strictly with mobile homes, speaking of mobile home parks, I will raise my hand and say I'm somewhat of a hoarder. I kept the old mobile home park inspection files, so I have those.
Great.
And some of those do have the as-bills, where some of those tanks may be, and some of them actually have as-bills for utilities. So if ever that question ever comes up, we have them available, so somebody wants to come and see them. And I'm going to pass along when I leave that whoever places me, I highly encourage them and Mr. Snelson to keep those files around.
Well, that's part of the reason we haven't seen a massive revitalization of older parks, is because they have the old heating fuel distribution lines in the ground, and they don't want to disturb them. They're like, That's why a lot of them sell seller financing and no bank, so they can avoid phase 1 environmentals.
We're aware of a couple of
No.
flues and towers.
All right.
Excellent, thank you.
And that's the last question. Do you all also have jurisdiction over smoke shops?
No.
Okay. So the conversation that I'm hoping to get from the state has to do with the hemp derivative products, Delta 9. And do you all track that?
No. That's why I said earlier that if we had something that said specifically THC instead of.
Then you could.
Yeah, you could. Right now, we have to go by the definition contained in the state codes, and it specifically exempts hemp products.
Okay, so is there a difference between formally tracking and hearing about it? Do you hear about issues with the other products enough that says to you, you need that line of extended capacity because you're dealing with Delta 9 stuff, there's things that are coming into the streets that are hitting.
I think Yemco hears about it more than we do. We don't really get complaints about that specifically. I know the Vultures group down at Yemco, and that's more in their bailiwick right now. But if a line like that in the code that would bring them under
Great. Thank you. Yes, please, I'm interested in that line. I'm interested in this conversation. There are substantial infractions happening with respect to minors getting hands on stuff. And some of that is coming from the formal mechanisms and, a person, how they gray area purchase and distribute and whatever. But then there's these other products that are in these really gray, nebulous areas with respect to code and law that I hope that the state is, we're expecting a presentation on that from the state's perspective, so that gives us some more power locally to enforce. But I think the line that
That's what we were kind of thinking we were gonna hear today was.
Yeah.
From the state.
Well, so stay tuned,
Yeah.
because it's coming back, and we love that you all came today. This has been deeply informative. So usually for lunchtime, they say there's a thing called a lunch and learn. This is a wake up and learn. So pretty early in the morning, lots of great information. Please stay by with us as that conversation from the state regs around those other hemp products comes forward. We're interested in the regulation, maintaining a safe environment for our minors, for our young people, but also maintaining a strong up and up cannabis industry that is doing the right thing and making sure that we keep that track moving forward.
Our overall interaction with the cannabis industry has been very good. I mean, we've had very few, problem people, and they seem to go to the wayside. Everybody else has been, for the most part, very professional.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your team. Thank you for the work that you all doing. And I can get that information to us, and then any other things that you think of along the way that we may be able to help out with legislative action or just putting a spotlight on it. Please bring it to our attention.
I'm glad you're here.
And the ride-alongs.
Cleanup money. I know that state was going to bring that up to you, as far as the demolition of the properties and the cleanup properties, and then we're working on another list for making cleanup properties last year. I've been here 26 years and we've only had that money the last maybe 4 or 5 years. It's made a huge difference in some of the places we've been able to go in to clean up. Otherwise, we pretty pleased, and nothing gets cleaned up. And word does travel, and it was a small town, so people understand that. We come in and say, either you do it or we're going to do it.
Charge you.
Now that we have that money from you folks, we have teeth, and it makes a huge difference being able to go in and clean up the property. They may jump it right back up, but we can at least, get it cleaned once, and then we're going to go back, through Superior Court, the one down North Pine, right next to the park. We got a park right across the street in the rec house. We cleaned it last year. We're probably going to get it again this year. But that funding from you guys makes a huge difference for us, and we go to Vegas. So I just want to thank you for that.
Excellent. Well, make sure we keep that on our top priority radar. Those are the relationship between a legislative action and a positive outcome that we want the public to know happens in our work. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Great. We'll move to the next part of our conversation for folks in the room. I've started this for assembly members. I've started to reorganize the list so that it makes also sense of the next meeting. I would like us as assembly members, I'll share it through staff prior, and Mr. Cross and I will have a chance to look at it prior, but just reorganizing the subjects as well, let alone the particular action items. For example, we have on our list of legislative priorities for 2023, we have a few categories that describe things related to alcohol, related to marijuana. And so for me, we'll just reorganize it around a category that says monitor and respond to, and then the subjects underneath that will be like alcohol, changes, hemp regulation, and cannabis. So we can group them all together, and it creates one agenda item with subpoints. So I'm going to reorganize a lot of the work that seems they're overlapping into the appropriate buckets, and then see what we've accomplished in that way. Having said that, can we eliminate some things right now, Mr. Cross?
Yeah, I can let you know from our list the things that are coming up real close.
Yes,
So,
and let's eliminate.
if I just go back, looks like attached to our agenda, we've got the sheet that's A through P. Okay, just going down the things that I've been working with. Community roles, community land trust, create. Okay, create a category of pre-approved plans. That is actually budgeted. I want to say that we approved $100,000 and it's gone out for RFP through purchasing, which is in order a firm to go out and start collecting that database and put it together. And seeing what that looks like. So that's going to be an RFP that's gone out. So they haven't began work, but it's been funded. There's money set aside for it. Now it's going through the process of putting those people and directing those people on it. Housing presentation, I just scratched that one off. We've done that one several times. It's an old matter. Of course, this is from 23, I think the beginning of 23, so now we're into 24. Triplex and fourplex expansion, we know we passed that one primarily. It did more benefit for triplexes than fourplexes. Technically, you can still do fourplexes, kind of like triplex with an ADU, which is what some builders are trying to do. We did pass that resolution. I was hoping a Ross would be here because there was a resolution by the Assembly to look at the design criteria manual, the C-stamp, and what we can do within our code in order to move fourplexes, because as I said, they're kind of like the platypus of real estate, right? They're, for all lending purposes and for everything, they're considered residential properties because they qualify for FHA, VA. 85% of them are owner-occupied properties. Yet they're still commercial as far as how we push them through code enforcement. So, what are those things we can do to bring those in, because they're a really good option for smaller infill on our R2M lots and R3 lots, the smaller lots. I'd love to get something we haven't heard, but again, we did resolve and ask the planning department and development services in order to come up with what are those key things we can do to more aggressively attack the fourplex. I haven't heard from them. Residential zoning changes, that's the home initiative. That's Bronga, Zalatel, and Volid. They're working on that. So
Brawley, yes.
Oh,
That was Brawley?
oh, excuse me. Yeah, you're right.
Brawley.
Thank you. I apologize. What other ones do we have? Third-party plan review for commercial. That one is actually coming up the next assembly meeting. So Randy, myself, and again Brawley worked on that one for some time, and then and thankfully again Knopfsinger came back with another one, which basically expanded the role, made some changes, and incorporated some concerns we had from the Structural Engineers Association of Alaska and some other departments, and then consolidated those and also expanded it. So originally my third-party review for commercial only dealt with structural, but this deals with architectural, electrical, plumbing, mechanical, and all the trades, and then creates a qualifying system that those individuals become licensed third party, and then with an audit procedure by the planning department to go in and double check those plans. I think a 10% goal is what they're looking to audit. But anyway, that one's coming up before the assembly. And again, what's important about this one, this is something that was it started from the assembly, but it's important for you guys to note when it gets before us. The one that we currently have was really driven from the planning department. And so that came from Ross and those individuals. It is 99.9% of what they suggested. And then we took that, and I'm meeting with the home builder, Acreage Home Builders today, have a meeting at noon. We'll discuss it. But we sent it to scope engineering and permitting, a couple of different people, and they all, so far I haven't heard anything like, yes, this is moving in the right direction. So it gives us some malleability. Because a lot of that third-party plan review moves into what we have as item H, which is expediting permitting during peak season. That's really the only benefit of using third party is during peak season, where our planning department gets way behind, simply because we know they're short staffed, and then there's these waves. It gives them an option to use some of that. Otherwise, what we have found is most contractors would typically just continue using, or most, even commercial, would continue using the plan approval process as it currently states and using municipal employees. But during peak season, having an option for third party is nice, especially when you're facing aggressive timelines. So that's most of the things that we have that we're working on. I have two others that are not on here, things that have expanded and grown since then that'll be before. That again was from conversations I had with Dave Whitfield and Craig Lyons, and they came forward And I asked them to work on a reduction of the open space. I believe we talked about that either last CDC or before. And that is an elimination of open space requirements on commercial multifamily properties if you're within a quarter mile of a school or a park. And that'll really open up. There's a couple that I can think of. There's a large development right on the corner of Arlene and Diamond that's got a ton of open space requirement on it, but it's literally adjacent to a huge park. Like the backyard is a massive park, so it's like, why do we have an open space requirement? It's reducing units, making it almost like with all the open space requirements and the off-site requirements to improve the little tributaries and the streets that feed it. There's no way. I can't get it. They can't find anybody who's going to build on that. You increase the units, then you increase the profitability, and you increase, the amount of housing units you can put on it, and then it starts to pencil, and some of these larger lots will actually are anticipations they get built on. What other items did we have that we were working on that may not be on this list? Open space requirements. There's a couple other small things that are insignificant, but I think that's a bulk of what I've been working on. And the nice thing is, before I'm up in April, I think open space, hopefully a small amendment to fourplex, third-party plan review, and at least a moving direction in the right of the pre-approved plans. Most of that will be moving forward pretty aggressively, if not passed.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. And I've noted those items in action, the ones that are coming up, and again, I'll reorganize them. Just to be clear, like the list that we're working from, and this is available to the public on our agenda. It's the backside of our published agenda. But the list is essentially A to O in terms of letters of different initiatives. And some of those are in buckets that could be identified as thematic buckets. And rather than like H and K are aligned, we'll organize them in a way that it's much clearer to see them in the buckets, this particular body of work in that particular category. So I appreciate the feedback right now. And I would say the other one, for example, is as we go through, I'll do it one by one just for the sake of it. Alcohol law changes, we've done that. So that's a check and accomplishment. We've realigned our processes internally to the state processes with respect to the licensing. And so that frequency is aligned. That's a check on that. We got the updates on the roadmap to vital and safe Anchorage group. I'm always interested in all of the outside groups who have different reports and how long those reports take to turn into action. We got that update. I'm not waiting for more from that at this point. C on our list is expand tax abatement and reinvestment focus areas. I think that was a language that may have been the way it was brought to us at the time, at that point in time. But essentially, we are still looking for different ways to expand reinvestment opportunities. And I do expect a project from ACDA, for example, is working on something with assembly members to speak into that category. So there'll be an update onto that. And as you go through all of them, if there are any members that have items that want to be added or be considered to be added into one of the buckets, please email them to us. And if there are any items on here that you have worked on that we haven't captured the updates, please let us know.
So one more that's not on this list that's going to be on Tuesdays. That was the laid on table item for the urban design. If you remember, middle of last year, there was a on-site change for urban design regarding residential and multifamily. And we had several landscape architects and stuff saying, hey, it should be extended outside just some areas and extended to a more broader acreage. And then, so the assembly, under that advice, we passed that. It is now under deeper scrutiny. They're realizing it's created more issues than it's solving. So the planning department and the Anchorage Home Builders have asked us to rescind that and post-date it, so make it retroactive, so as if it didn't exist until they can go back and clean that up. So what it's done is there's a bunch of different things we can go. I don't know if we need to go into details, the headaches that we've created, but we've been highly encouraged to pull that back, let them go back and make the necessary changes and bring it back forth in a fixed one. So again, I would, in fact, what's funny is we might call that the, I wish he was here, he'd probably love it, it'd stroke his ego. That was the Chris Constance, I told you so. Because Chris said, I'm not sure that'll work. I have a feeling that'll create more problems. That's just my hypothesis, and he was dead right. So anyway, so good Chris, he said we should have listened to him that time, but we were advised to expand it, and that bit us in the foot. So Tuesday night, it'll be an amendment to that urban design criteria that we changed back in again last summer, and that'll be repealed, worked on, tweaked before they reenact it to something a little more.
What's the
limited.
numbers on that?
I don't
I'm
have it,
getting
but it'll be pretty
so-
obvious. You'll know when it comes
Okay.
up. It's going to be in the 14s because it's new public
Okay.
hearing. Because
Thanks.
13s are continued public hearing, and this one's new.
Okay.
But we laid it on the table because they wanted it done in 2 weeks, so that it doesn't have negative impact on new construction.
Season.
There's been a bunch of, Andre Spinelli and the home builder said, we've got houses right now that we had approved and ready to go that no longer meet the code, because only a certain percentage, we reduced on certain situations the size of the driveway and the amount of frontage you could have on a property. Anyway, I won't go into details other than it's been highly encouraged.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'm looking for your support on that.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. And yes, to any other members, as items are being worked on, please make sure we know about them. We'll put them into the bucket. And just to go back to a point, Mr. Cross mentioned the third-party review and the way an idea was coming from him and other members, and then the way planning stepped into and kind of brought forward their own plan. That happens at this committee. And that's why the importance of this committee is to respect all the body of work that can come through this committee, knowing that we don't have many opportunities as members to talk about projects with open meetings requirements. And so we take advantage of these committees, and so we also encourage staff to come and say, hey, we have an idea. We would love for that idea to find a home. This is the committee for us to be able to work on those things. Another item that will be added to the list that we've started talking about more robustly are the creative economy elements. This is things like we've had a presentation on the music festival that happened last year. I'm having a presentation, the Chair Constant connecting me to a conversation with a larger discussion that's been multiple years in the works around music cities, Alaska, and connecting our city to the Cascadia region of music and creative arts and all of that with respect to economic development. So that'll be another category for our review under this committee as well. And I'd also say that there is so much more work to be done on the vacant and abandoned properties that I wanted to make sure that we continue to always have a highlight on that. And shout out to real estate director who's with us today. Hello. ACDA is working on an initiative around some of those redevelopment aspects for property. I think that's very exciting. So that comes into the way we can expand reinvestment in our community. But also, the Assembly has appropriated some money for a pilot or some sort of project that is about instigating and incentivizing housing. And so I'm excited about what that could be. And so looking forward to working with real estate on that project, but that'll be part of our legislative package this year and the stuff we're working on. So cool.
So I don't have a straight answer. Is anyone working on allowing the tiny little homes to be allowed? We've got these different agencies that are trying to set up a pallet community, and they are awaiting changes that will make that legal. And I don't know if anyone's working on it.
Well, it's not that they're not allowed, it's that nobody's done one so that we have an approved set of prints or approved, you know what I mean? You have to go through that process. So, I mean, a lot maybe, if anybody in the room wants to correct me, but my understanding is it's not that they're not allowed, It's that obviously it needs to make sure it meets our building specs up here. We're not Arizona, we're not California. So some of these have different insulation, they have different R values, they have different things that we need, they need to meet our code. So that's, in a way, that's kind of what we're trying to do with the pre-approved plans. Is if we can come up with some small home, you might call them tiny homes, or we can, whatever that alternative form, and get a set of prints that's approved, then we can expedite that. But the cost and expense to be the first people to start doing that, you're bearing the cost and the burden until we have a proven model of something that works. Am I wrong on that? Does anybody disagree? Okay, so that's kind of where we're at. It's not that they can't be done, it's that it's so expensive right now because you're basically doing something for the first time that until one's been done a couple times, which is why the only place right now that they're really currently being kind of utilized is in where they have much lower, controls in place, which is the valley.
So they have someone designing these for them that is experienced, and should they connect with you to make sure that?
I mean, I don't know if I'm necessarily the right person. I would say identify a good engineer. I mean, there is a huge market opportunity for the individuals that want to put their brain power together and come up with a design that is approved by the municipality for them, with only minor facade changes on the outside, so you can get a different aesthetic look without major structural changes, so that you can get to construction rapidly. But some of the costs that are accrued on some of these that are is, if you go and add tiny houses, even if you want like an ADU, if you add one on the back, they still need to tie into water and sewer. And so a lot of the cost on some of these tiny houses isn't necessarily the house, it's the utilities that go to it. When you're talking about utilities going to a 4,000 square foot house, then by the quantity of scale, it's much more affordable than feeding a 400 square foot building. The cost of extending utilities is the same. It's the same whether you're building 400 square feet or you're building 4,000 square feet. It's the pipe diameter might change mildly, but excavation, permitting, trenching, that's your bulk of your cost, not necessarily materials. So I think what needs to happen is some pre-approved plans, some things that we can do to expedite that. I think that's probably where that's going to show up. If we can get, and then that might be a research project. I mean, I know our planning department is already really busy, but that would be something we did kind of like triplex and fourplex, where that took 6-7 months for us sitting in this room, which would be looking at and analyzing where in both Title 21 and Title 23, tiny homes or alternative forms of construction are not currently being allowed, doing a working group on where we can resolve those issues.
Okay, so that is the biggest, that's the thing I'm supposed to be figuring out is land use. If they put 5 in a church parking lot, is that going to be allowed?
Well, 5, each one is considered a unit, right? And so now you've got 5 units. So anything over 4.1 is now commercial, right? So you've done 4 units on one, you've done 5 units on one lot. That's the same as building a 5-plex. So one is the property zoned. What are the setbacks and restrictions? What are the utilities? What is the grading around each one? What is the parking requirement now that you've added 5 units? It's not like it's no longer residential, so you're going to have, you're going to have some access requirements. How much traffic are you adding? So when we go to add these little things, it may sound simple at the surface, but then in Title 23 and Title 21, once you go over a certain number, it triggers other on-site and off-site reviews. Plus, if you're doing more than 5, right? So now you're doing off-site improvements, which means I want to put 5 tiny homes. That's the same as building a 5-plex. Well, what if the street that leads up to it doesn't meet municipal standards? Now I got to do off-site improvements. I got to bring it up. And what if there's supposed to be a fire hydrant, but there's not? I might have to add a fire hydrant, street lighting. So it's all those other triggers that go in place, which is the Pandora's box. Which, hey, it sounds good. But until we do an intentional work session and we say, here's what that looks like. That's where I've always, we've talked about this at the CDC several times. This is what's messed up in our code, is that we tie density to unit count, not number of people it occupies. Because I can build a triplex with 3 5-bedroom units, and that building might be 6,000 square feet, okay? And that's a different process than building a 4-plex with all 1-bedroom units that are 400 square feet each, and now we're talking about a 1,600 square foot property. And yet that 4-plex is treated dramatically different than the triplex, because our density is based on unit count, not size of building, and not number of occupants, which is really when you think density it is. But that's a long, how do we untie that and how do we unmangle that? We'll be dealing with many more assembly members from now.
I'll talk to you offline, but I was under the understanding that it's sort of like they're gonna treat these like mobile homes and we would have to do
Well, if they're mobile homes,
change in
then
land use.
then
to
it's gotta be
qualify.
R5, right? So then it's gotta be zoned, it's gotta be mobile home zoned property, and it's also gotta be in the covenants and restrictions that allow for mobile home use.
Okay.
And then if it's a temporary structure, so what is the foundation that qualifies for a temporary structure? Because I think temporary structures are anything that you can only do like 18 months on, right? But what is your return on investment for something that you can only have for 18 months? At what point do I convert to more traditional? So, I mean, yes, it's a Pandora's box in order for us to get there.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. That was the weeds. If anyone wants to know, that's what it sounds like being in the weeds.
I love playing in the grass.
Oh, yeah, literally. So, well, what I would say is, there are lots of avenues, obviously, where that conversation lives. The first reaction that I had was, I think the why matters. So I think part of what the question was, if I'm reading it accurately, comes from the conversation that we've had now with respect to sheltering, housing, and these intermediate steps of these alternative intermediate sheltering steps that are not permanent. And so that conversation, that shorthand-wise in our community sounds like the pallet shelters. Right? And so if that's accurate, then I would say Dean Gates is the person that was tracking the small degree of permission to create the alternative structure of a pallet shelter that comes from our AO last summer. That created a space that gives the opportunity to
The
build.
allowed camping.
Yeah, but there was that element of the structure. So Dean Gates, I talked to him recently, he's still tracking that.
Okay.
And so probably following up with Dean,
Okay.
which is a little different than where Kevin was, but they're all interrelated at a certain point down the line in terms of the idea of even pre-approved plans for those alternative structures.
And what it might be easier to do is like what they've done in Detroit and they did in other cities, which is rather than try to amend the entire building code, they just created a new chapter for tiny homes.
The small.
Or they created a new chapter in their code that dealt with, I think specifically it was, they have one which is, remodeled properties, rejuvenation, but their problem was, they have a much older housing supply than we have. Ours is old, but I mean, it's not as old as say Chicago in some areas where they have houses that are 150 years old. So they actually carved out, and rather than try to amend their code to accommodate those, created a existing structure remodel building code separate from, you know what I mean? Which is kind of like a merger. It's the best, it's the best of the health and life safety, but removes a lot of things that might make the property economically unrealistic to revitalize. And maybe that's something we do in a long time, but that's why over the last 2 years we've been taking the low-hanging fruit, expediting those things, and then as we get into those more complicated things, my guess is that's going to take years for us to unwind or deal with, and it's going to take a comprehensive effort by all departments.
Great. Are there any members of the general public here with us today that would like to speak?
Was that, did you say general public?
Yes. There's 2 minutes?
Is this
Just
for
3
the
minutes.
audience participation part?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, so that's good.
Yeah, for 3 minutes, and if you would come forward and just
State your name, area of Anchorage that you're in, and then you have 3 minutes.
Right.
thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Hello, my name is Evan Leaf. I'm from the Sand Lake neighborhood region. I just have some comments on the zoning and what is it called? Lost some track of thought. I was very excited to come here today and learn about the zoning as well, and I just want to bring some of my concerns and suggestions to either the assembly, whoever is in the party for now, as well as the comments that I have on what I heard today. I would like to bring concern to an underutilization of land as private parking lots. I like to advocate a loosening of parking minimum requirements and Anchorage regulations for a broad array of properties and businesses such as malls, strip malls, movie theaters, hotels, shops, single-family homes, multiple family units, and potentially allow a system of codes or right-of-way laws for private properties selling off underutilized or vacant concrete lots for any form of development. Namely, in my own experience, I noticed that many businesses have peak hours where they have a lot of their parking lots filled, but at the cutoff of an evening or at night, they're underutilized or vacant. They become it's not a very pleasant place to walk by constantly. It just looks like a flat desert of concrete. And I just think that there's a lot of land in Anchorage that isn't utilized, seeing as we are already expanding southward and eastward, as well as in Girdwood, we're adding new housing development there. I think there's a lot of land in the city that could be reutilized. I would also like to suggest an adaptation to zoning regulations in Anchorage for small corner store businesses in Anchorage, particularly R1 zoning. I think there should be either reclassification of R1 zoning in Anchorage for many neighborhoods. In my personal experience, I live in the Sand Lake neighborhood region, and a walk to my local church or elementary school is within walking distance and safe. The sidewalks on Strawberry, my closest main street to me, are safe, and as well as the distance from the road and traffic calming measures, and I like the traffic calming measures. However, if I wanted to walk to pick up groceries of any kind, I'm hindered by a large distance. My closest store for groceries is the Car on Diamond, which averages about a 35-minute walk just one way for me. And if I wanted to walk back, it would be with carrying those groceries for another 35-minute walk. Now, it is easier to drive of that, but many people don't want to drive, or they could, potentially don't own a car. Even in my own neighborhood, say kids just want to go to the store, pick up something. I think that there should be I think that there should be reform for the zoning in R1 in a lot of neighborhoods in Anchorage to allow for essentially small mom and pop corner stores in neighborhoods. I'm thinking a lot like Greenwich Village in New York has a lot of stores in neighborhoods, as well as I've seen the show Kim's Convenience. I like that show a lot. I watch it with my grandmother, but it has a small corner store, convenience store that you can get your local groceries in. Just get in, grab a handful of stuff, but you just walk back home within distance. You don't have to park or drive or so. And
Excellent. Thank you, Evan. Your 3 minutes are up.
Thank you.
But you did a fantastic job. Thank you for showing up.
Mm-hmm.
So I got, if I may respond. So one, I'm really happy you brought up parking minimums. Dan Voland and I addressed that last year, so we removed the parking minimums for commercial. We're still getting, a lot of private developers sometimes like the extra space, particularly in light of the last 2 winters that they had, because they need to have somewhere to put the snow to store it. So there's that balance between having enough space for parking and having enough for snow storage. But our intention was to remove the parking minimums. To give you an example, there was a large assisted living facility on the corner of Tudor and Baxter that was required because it had, I can't remember, it's like 70-something beds. They were required to have like 150 parking spots, but they're into life care for elderly, which means most of those beds people don't drive because they're on life support. So why do we need all these parking spaces for people who don't drive? So that was part of what generated that. So we get more green space. They can convert some of that to parking area, to parks, make a nice green field. So dealing with the parking minimums, what you just seen is it only was enacted last year. So, and it takes time for this stuff to start showing up in our community as far as that. So I really appreciate that you support our reduction of parking minimums. As far as the zoning changes for R1, the best thing that you're probably going to want to do is get involved with your community council. And it's your community councils that make suggestions as far as how we adjust our land use plans, right? And so we're really community driven. And so here as an assembly, we're not going to do anything until it's gone through that public process. That the community council goes in, they do their comprehensive plans for their areas, and then they say, here are some areas in our neighborhood that have been underutilized for business use or whatever, and this would be beneficial. And so rather than start at the top, we're kind of like community driven upwards. Bring your concerns and find more of your friends to participate at the community council level, and you'll get a lot further quicker than you will telling the policy drivers, because we rely on those letters and recommendations on how we make adjustments. Anything else?
If you have additional comments that you would like to share with us, please email us anything that you weren't able to speak today, but you would like for us to walk away with knowing.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Kevin and Mr. George.
Thanks for showing up, man.
Thank you for being with us today. Are there any other members of the general public here? Are there any members of the general public on the phone? Hearing none, I say we are
Adjourned.
adjourned, and we'll call that 10:26.